Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
And welcome in, everybody, DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management across all platforms, podcast, video, everything else. We just jump right into it here today. Obviously, as there has been now for many, many days in a row, a lot to get into, but not every conversation is as meaningful as the one we're about to have as we look back on the legacy of Georgia tight end Brock Bowers, who announced it yesterday, as we all expected that he would, that he is moving on to the NFL draft and leaving behind one of the great careers in the entire history of Georgia football. And I've been thinking about this from a lot of different vantage points over the last little bit. You know, when I think about Brock Bowers, one of the very first things that comes to mind for me is the very first college game that Brock Bowers ever played against Clemson in the 2021 season. And it's one of those things where whatever your reality is, it's like that's sometimes the only thing you can remember, and it becomes very difficult to recall how different things used to be, sometimes as recently as a couple of years ago. And I believe that Georgia fans probably find themselves in a similar situation to that. You know, Georgia now doesn't really play second fiddle to anyone in any game that it plays. But to begin the 2021 season in Charlotte, I'll also remember that game as like the first game we brought back full crowds again after the debacle of 2020. But, you know, you had a full stadium there to watch Georgia against Clemson. And I just think it can be difficult to fully put into full context exactly how important that game was for Georgia at the time. Georgia was trying to be where Clemson had been. Clemson had won a couple of national championships. Clemson had become a fixture in the college football playoff. Clemson locally, I should say regionally, had a better brand than Georgia had because of the success that Clemson had enjoyed. And Georgia was, I think, very eager to show that it could play on the same level of Clemson and get past Clemson. And that day that happened. Georgia went on to win the next two national championships. Clemson's not quite what it once was, but that was a very important day in Georgia football's recent history in the Kirby Smart era, because it was one of those moments, the phrase we've heard Smart, say after that game, you're either elite or you're not. That was the first step towards Georgia proving that it truly was an elite level program. And I say all that to say, if you remember that game, not a great day for Georgia offensively. Admittedly, they didn't score an offensive touchdown, but that day, knowing how important the game was going to be for the elite status that Georgia craved and sought after and was pursuing, every moment, every decision in a game like that mattered immensely. And if you'll remember, the guy that got targeted for Georgia that day more than any other player was Brock Bowers. And Brock Bowers was playing in his first ever college game in that time. And yet somehow behind the scenes throughout the calendar year of 2021, working towards his college debut, Brock was showing Todd Hartley and at the time Todd Monken and obviously Kirby Smart that he was a special player. So much so that it's almost as if the offensive game plan for that particular day against a Clemson team that was a great defense and in a very important game, it's almost like the game plan was sort of built around what Georgia believed that Brock Bowers could do. And that was our first indication that on a team that was filled with great players and on a program that produces great players year after year after year, Brock Bowers is just in a different category. And in that moment, we've kind of all seen that for ourselves. And we've also watched the way in which others kind of outside the bubble of DawgNation have been able to see that for themselves too. Because if you want to go back to Bowers and his freshman year, statistically one of the best years that anybody's ever had catching the football at Georgia, and yet the position that he plays tight end, you'll remember this, Bowers wasn't even a finalist for the Mackey Award that year as the nation's top tight end, despite the fact that Bowers would go on to win the award the next 2 years, becoming the first one to ever win the Mackey Award twice. But you can make a case that the most statistically dominant year that Bowers ever had in a Georgia uniform took place in his freshman year, that he very easily could have won the Mackey Award all 3 years that he was in college, but it sort of took people kind of outside the bubble of DawgNation a little while, perhaps even more than a year, to realize just how different Brock was. And on a Georgia team that had a lot of great players, that Bowers, I would say, with all due respect to others, kind of stood in the forefront, even in comparison to the other great players that Georgia has had here. And to me, you can sort of sum this up in kind of a couple of different ways. Brock Bowers, as we said before, he played tight end, but in a lot of ways, Brock Bowers redefined tight end. Tight end looks different now across college football and frankly across football in general because of what guys like Bowers are able to do. In fact, I was talking to a high school coach in Georgia a couple of months ago, and it seems like there are a lot of really good tight ends in our state right now. Just every now and then you have these sort of cycles of one position's up, one position's down. And it just seems like right now there's just an incredible collection of kind of athletic tight ends across the state of Georgia, and coaches are using them in a pretty creative way, I would say. And I asked a coach, why do you think that is? Why do you think there are so many good tight ends in Georgia right now? One of the things this coach said to me is, well, people also see how Georgia's using Brock Bowers, and there's naturally going to be a little bit of a copycat tendency on that of when you see how successful a guy like Bowers is, there's a tendency to want to have that for yourself and kind of show off the sort of creative play calls that you can put on display when you've got a tight end who's as versatile as Brock Bowers is. And that's kind of part of Brock's legacy there as well, that moving forward at all levels of the sport, and I think eventually the NFL too, at all levels of the sport, I think the tight end position is just kind of thought of in a different way now because of what Brock Bowers, did while being here at Georgia. In a lot of ways, he really redefined the position. But in addition to that, this is perhaps the most important thing for me about Brock in a Georgia uniform. In addition to redefining the position, I think that Brock Bowers really transcended the position there as well. And I don't think that you can fully appreciate what Brock was without talking about something that Georgia has kind of desperately needed. Georgia is a program that produces greatness virtually across the board in every area, especially on defense, but also, RBU, running backs, offensive line. Georgia's had, great offensive lines. Georgia's gotten very good quarterback play the last few years there as well. This is a Georgia team that's just really good at producing great players and collections of great players across almost every position group. But the position group that's probably lagged the most for Georgia in comparison to the standards set by other position groups is wide receiver. We know that to be true. It's one of those things that Georgia's dealt with, negative recruiting, from other programs, things like that. You can't be great at everything perhaps across the board. And the one position group that sort of lagged for Georgia probably has been the wide receiver position a little bit, which makes the career of Bowers so much more interesting and frankly so much more laudable because not only has Bowers redefined the tight end position, I believe at Georgia, he has also transcended the tight end position because let's just face it, there is an expectation we have for tight ends in terms of their statistical production that's lower than we would have for great wide receivers. But I'll be more than happy to tell you this. Do not judge Brock Bowers in comparison to other tight ends. Judge him in comparison to other wide receivers. Judge him in comparison to Rome Odunze or Marvin Harrison Jr. or anybody that's kind of come through college football over the course of the last few years. Judge Bowers not just against other tight ends. That's frankly probably not even fair. Judge him against the best wide receivers that have come through college football over the course of the last 3 years. And I believe the career for Brock Bowers, the statistical prowess of Brock Bowers, the penchant for making big plays and big moments for Brock Bowers, I believe it stands alongside any wide receiver, any pass catcher of a different position than his sort of natural position. I believe the career for Bowers compares favorably to those guys there as well. And that's probably ultimately what I think makes Brock such a historic figure at Georgia. The fact that even if you want to compare him to other receivers, and by the way, he was even mentioned for the Blitnikoff Award here this year, the nation's top receiver, and who knows how that could have, perhaps been a different conversation had he been fully healthy. We certainly believe he would have had a chance to be a Heisman finalist as Marvin Harrison Jr. was here this year because Bowers not only redefined his position, he really transcended that position there as well. So, we could do this all day long. We could say, give me those moments, give me those memories, the crazy catch against Florida, the unbelievable collection of highlights against South Carolina in 2022, the way in which he kind of took over the Auburn game here this year, the fact that he so courageously came back from injury to play in his final home game against Ole Miss. Maybe my top moment of all, that interesting contortion he did to convert the fourth, almost like a Matrix style move to convert the fourth down against Ohio State and preserve Georgia's chance for victory, and how additionally interesting that seemed to be because the fact that, we'd all seen Georgia doing yoga at practice a couple days before, and you just sort of roll your eyes. Oh my gosh, this, Kirby being Kirby, making the media watch them do yoga. And then you see Bowers during that game go out and do a yoga move, essentially, in one of the biggest moments of the game. And you're just sort of left to really reflect on the fact that he was so representative and such an embodiment of what has made Georgia special over the course of this time there as well. We said before the year began that Brock Bowers would be in our Mount Rushmore of all-time great Georgia Bulldogs. Obviously, Herschel Walker, to me, still stands head and shoulders the greatest player in program history. I'd put Bowers on there. I'd put David Pollock on there. There's probably some debate about who that fourth perhaps would be. But for us, we said we'd put Nick Chubb on there. That, for us, our Mount Rushmore of all-time great dogs, Herschel, Bowers, Pollock, and Chubb. That's our sort of our representation of the greatest players in this program's history. Your mileage may vary, but I do believe that Bowers and Herschel have to be unanimous for everybody. I believe that's the status that Bowers has now, collected. That you've had so many great players have come through this program in recent years, but the one unanimous selection for anyone on their all-time great dogs, however you define it, Mount Rushmore or whatever your sort of shortest of short list is, of the best players ever that's come through UGA, I think that Brock Bowers has got to be on that list. And no doubt in, the days to come, we'll all be kind of sharing our memories of what made him so special. Also, for some additional context in this for a moment, I want you to hear Todd Hartley from the other day, having a chance to hear from him on, at the time was, will Bowers play in the Orange Bowl or not? That was some of the context around this, but also just that chance on a guy who's coached him on a daily basis. And Todd's such a great spokesman for Georgia, such an interesting personality. It's fun to hear from Todd Hartley during these bowl games because Todd's just a really good dude, obviously, in addition to being a very good football coach. It was really nice to hear Todd share that sort of first-person perspective on why he has believed Brock Bowers to be such a great player and what he has enjoyed about the chance to coach Brock on a regular basis. So on a day in which Brock has announced that he is officially moving on to the NFL draft, as we all knew that he would, let's hear Todd Hartley, his position coach at Georgia, talk more about, why Brock Bowers will be so fondly remembered. This is from last week in Miami, at the time not knowing if Brock would play in the Orange Bowl, but a little bit from Todd Hartley here for a couple of minutes.
We don't know. His status is still unsure. He's still battling that ankle injury that's been nagging him, it seems like, forever now. And he's been great in his rehab. I hope he makes it. I don't know if he will. It's still something that we're up in the air on, waiting to see. But he's been great in support of his teammates throughout the prep ever since the Alabama game. So we'll see.
There's a chance if he doesn't play, he can join you all on the sideline and be with his teammates?
I don't know that yet. I think he's just focused on getting that ankle 100%. And if he gets 100%, then I think he's going to try to do everything he can to help us. And if he doesn't, then he'll be there to support his teammates. So it's still the good thing about right now. We still got a couple of days until we play. So I know he's battling hard. So we'll see what happens.
I mean, he's a guy after the injury could have gone. After SEC champ could be somewhere at a combine training.
After Vanderbilt,
right?
He could have went somewhere. He didn't have to come back.
What does that say about him?
I think the people that are around us a lot know what type of person Brock is, right? You know what type of competitor Brock is, and I think it just shows how much he loves his teammates, right? It shows how much he loves his coaching staff, and it shows how much he loves Georgia, man. He is. Y'all have asked me a lot of questions about Brock before, and just how much of a competitor he is. Like, he loves to compete. He is the ultimate competitor. And so the fact that he came back in, 3 weeks, it was unbelievable that he came back from that ankle injury, that surgery, came back and played at a really high level against Ole Miss. Just shows how much he wanted to keep playing for, again, his teammates, his coaches in this university.
As I said before, I love hearing from Todd Hartley. I think he's just a tremendous figure in the Georgia program. And Todd also loves UGA, which I really like there as well. It's nice to have a guy coaching at Georgia that just obviously a very big Georgia fan. You know what I'm saying? Like, just really likes Georgia. And so I'm sure Todd's having the time of his life, coaching these great players. And, this is one of those things where, obviously Todd Hartley will tell his grandchildren about, having coached Brock Bowers, of course, but I think we'll all tell our grandchildren about that this was, this is a player to be remembered in a very special way. And I am very, very grateful that I got to see it, because It's fun to watch the amazing highlights, and there's no doubt a long list of those. It is awesome to have Bauer's contributions be part of so many Georgia wins. That's something in which we're all very, very proud. But in addition to that, there is something sort of life affirming about a guy who also seems to go about it the right way. And you hear some of that from Todd Hartley there. You've heard him say that before. You've heard Kirby Smart talk about that before. That Bowers just went about the business the right way. That the oldest cliche in the book of, you give me 11 Brock Bowers, I'll go out there and take on anybody. In this case, that really is true. That you want whatever it was to make Bauer, that made Bauer special, you want that to permeate the program as much as you possibly can, and hold that up as a real standard of what all of Georgia football is all about. And in so many ways, that's what Bowers has been able to achieve, and that is what Georgia has been able to resemble. So it is an end of an era here at UGA, and a moment in which we're all incredibly proud. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Breda Pest Management, and happy to have you with us, at least in some form, fashion here today. Still kind of filling things out a little bit, trying to make sense of our circumstances, but happy to have you with us, obviously across all platforms. And a big thanks to our friends at Breda Pest Management who make the show possible for you there as well. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. That is what Breda Pest Management is all about when it comes to protecting your home from bugs and critters and things like that. The same level of service they provide to UGA, they want to provide to you there as well. And there's a certain prestige about that. The same way we're kind of proud of the career of Brock Bowers at Georgia, we can also be proud to say, hey, the folks that are protecting my house from termites are the same ones that are protecting Sanford Stadium. I trust and use the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics for all my pest control needs. There's something kind of cool about that. But in addition to that, there's also additional value that comes your way when you make that decision as well from our friends at Breda Pest Management, because the level of success that Breda has been able to have over the course of the years, and by the way, this is like a multi-generational story for them when it comes to great success in business since 1975, 125 employees stretched all across our market area. The level of success they've been able to have, so successful, in fact, they've been recognized as the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. They want to leverage that for your benefit. Let's be real. Let's be honest here for a moment. Most of us are kind of coming off of a Christmas season in which we were once again reminded, my gosh, everything is just so much more expensive than it used to be. And as you're sort of thinking about sort of budget stuff for the upcoming year, where can we save money? Where can we put more money back in our pocket? That's a very real conversation that most of us are having in some form or some fashion. That's where Breda Pest Management can really help you, because when you make the switch to Breda Pest Management for your pest control needs, your termite protection, bugs, critters, keeping those like flying squirrels out of your attic and things like that, if you've got any issue related to that, when you make that decision to switch to Breda Pest Management, they're going to put more money back in your pocket, boom, immediately, just for making that choice. So I want you to find them online. It's bredapest.com. I'm going to spell it out for you. BREDA, bredapest.com. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics can be your pest control solution there as well. One more time, bredapest.com. BREDA, bredapest.com for more on that. All right. We're going to hear from Jake Fromm here in a little bit. Fun conversation with him coming up. We're also going to try to catch up with Mike Griffith here a little bit later on there as well. We'll hear from Jake coming up in a couple of minutes. But prior to that, I want to go around the doghouse, and I want to deal with a much less pleasant story here just for a moment than the celebration of what the career was for Brock Bowers. So last night, it's like trying to have dinner with my wife. And listen, nobody's going to shed tears here, but it's like you can't escape Georgia football news here right now. And last night at dinner, my wife and I are having a nice time together. You start hearing about Julian Humphrey. Oh, gosh, Julian Humphrey's going to the transfer portal. And I'm so ready for all this stuff to be over. I know many of you are there as well. It's just this is just sort of what the sport is here right now. And if it's frustrating for us, good and well, it's even more frustrating for Kirby Smart. And what I'm reminded of here for a little bit, I'm going to do a couple of minutes on this. What I'm reminded of here a little bit is that talking to some people from Florida State last week in Miami, one of the things they were saying was as to why Florida State had so many opt-outs prior to the Orange Bowl is that a lot of their coaches were on the road recruiting right at the end of the ACC title game. And so they weren't back in Tallahassee to play defense against all of these Florida State players kind of en masse deciding, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. This is not what I signed up for. I'm out. I'm done. And so they weren't there to kind of recruit their own roster. And, maybe that was an unavoidable issue, but that's kind of what some people in Tallahassee had sort of said became a problem was, Florida State coaches were on the road trying to secure recruits. And so therefore there was no one to kind of, I guess, quiet the storm of player opt-outs. And I say all that to say that is a perfect indication of exactly what college football has become here right now, where recruiting your own roster is perhaps as important as anything in the sport right now. Because if you've ever run a business or something like that, you've probably heard it say, like, I think the cliche goes that it's like 10 times more expensive to go out and get a new client than it is to hold on to your existing client. You perhaps heard that said before. Roster stuff's probably the same way. The player that you have, holding on to him, is a lot more efficient than having to try to go out and get a new player to replace him, whether that's a recruit or transfer, whatever else. So you want your own guys to stay on your roster for the most part because you've already kind of vetted them. You know they're players that you at least wanted to sign. In some cases, you find out you got buyer's remorse. But for the most part, you want to hold on to guys that you've had on your roster. And so therefore re-recruiting your own roster is just as important, if not more important, than high school recruiting, portal recruiting, things like that, holding on to the guys that you have. And this is where I think things get incredibly frustrating. The other day, and we'll show you the message from Humphrey here real quick. Humphrey put this out last night. We're sort of in the with that being said season. Humphrey did not exactly say with that being said in his particular announcement, but he did put it in there that he's going into the transfer portal. And I think what's frustrating about this, I'll read a little bit of this to you. He says, after careful consideration, I'll be entering the transfer portal with 3 years left of eligibility. And so, pretty similar stuff to what's been kind of said about this in the past. But it is a situation now where Georgia, I think, had thought that everything was all good with Humphrey, because Humphrey the other day kind of put out the Wolf of Wall Street, Jordan Belfort clip that Leo DiCaprio is like, I'm not going anywhere. In fact, we've even, done that on this show a couple of times, probably. It's kind of become the official way of announcing that you're coming back. Several Georgia players, I think, have done a version of the DiCaprio, Jordan Belfort clip here. Humphrey put that out the other day, which is about as much as of like an official declaration that he's planning on returning as just about anything. I think it's good news, or Georgia fans viewed that at the time as being good news, because I do believe that Humphrey's a talented player. He certainly showed some of that this year, would have obviously been a big part of the competition for playing time here next year. And yet late in the process, like right at the very end of the process, essentially, Humphrey's decided to move on. Procedurally, and this is where things get, I think, kind of boring, but I'm going to say it as quickly as I can nonetheless. So the portal window for the NCAA officially closed last night at midnight. But for Georgia, I believe the portal window is actually 5 days beyond their bowl game, which was December 30th. So I think technically the portal window for Georgia players still extends a little while longer. So we may not be quite done with portal stuff as it relates to UGA. There's also be like some straggling paperwork along the lines there too. But the other thing that maybe complicates the Humphrey part of this, and I realize this is so tedious, it sounds like I'm reading like an LSAT question to you. I totally understand that. But the other thing that's probably a factor in the Humphrey part of this is that while the portal window for bowl teams is 5 days beyond their actual bowl game, assuming that it's past January 2nd, which was the portal window closing, I do believe that if you want to play in the SEC next year, which was last year, February 1st deadline, if you want to transfer within the SEC, I believe this year that was a January 2nd deadline, which was obviously yesterday. So ultimately, that may be why the Humphrey thing happened when it did, somebody getting in his ear from within the league. I think there's some people out there that think they have an idea of where he might be going. So that is sort of that. Pretty frustrating, really, to be honest with you. Frustrating about, thinking you have a player coming back. No, he's not. I guess in Julian Humphrey's case, he feels like the grass is greener somewhere else. Maybe that'll turn out to be true for him. Who knows? But it sort of speaks to just the sort of wild chaos that seems to reign here a little bit with coaches at really no point in time knowing who is on their roster and who's staying and who's going. It's become pretty bizarre. And people say, well, these coaches make millions of dollars. They ought to be able to endure a little bit of turmoil. I mean, I guess that's true. Financially speaking, they're all going to be fine here, but it's just simply a matter of, what do we want our sport to be? Because as chaotic as the portal has been, there is reason to believe it could be even more chaotic moving forward, because all of a sudden now, it used to be the last couple of years, well, if it was the one-time transfer, you were kind of okay with guys who had already transferred one time, but now there's, seemingly no willingness to even try to defend the idea of a one-time transfer anymore, that it may even get more chaotic in the future. I'm not really quite so sure what you do about all of that. I'm just not. I mean, Kirby Smart spoke up the other day about his concern about, things related to the bowl game, the uncompetitive nature of the Orange Bowl, things like that. And I'd put this in sort of the same category of, I think deep down we all sort of know that somehow, some way, this current iteration of whatever the system is feels like something's a little off and feels like something's a little wrong with it. But how do you actually fix that? How do you define what the actual problem is? I think that's still kind of up for grabs here. Either way, a talented player is leaving Georgia. At one point in time, that was rumored to be true. Then it seemed like it was no longer rumored to be true. And obviously now it's more than a rumor. It appears that's the case. So Julian Humphrey is moving on. And we will see what happens next to Georgia secondary. Now, the flip side of this is, to put a positive spin on this for a moment, Georgia's secondary and vying for playing time is going to be one of the most fun conversations we have here in the offseason leading towards spring practice, which will be here before you know it. Because, the decision of Javon Bullard to move on, Tyke Smith to move on, obviously Kamari Laster to move on. This really opens the door for the Daniel Harrises, who I think a lot of Georgia fans are happy that he's returning. Ellis Robinson, who's apparently been turning heads in his all-star game here this week. KJ Bolden stepping in and perhaps earning some of the early playing time. Janelle Guerrero getting a chance to really show what he's all about. That you're clearly not happy to lose Julian Humphrey. It appears that Georgia's going to, and you probably weren't happy to lose A.J. Harris either, and I believe that's probably still true as well. But boy, there is a lot of young talent at Georgia, really, really eager to show what it's all about. So you hate to lose Humphrey, but still really excited about the Georgia secondary overall. All right, so that is that. This is DawgNation Daily presented by Breda Pest Management here today. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to try to catch up with Mike Griffith coming up in a little bit. That should be a fun conversation. Mike will have a lot to say about the news of the day. But for the first time in a couple of weeks, we get a chance to catch up with the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm. And one of the things we get into with Jake in particular is, we just saw a thrilling Rose Bowl game, eyes of America kind of on the overtime battle between Michigan and Alabama. Well, one time a few years ago, Jake Fromm played in a game like that. What does that exactly feel like? And how many fond memories does Jake have of what I think is one of the great moments in Georgia program history, even knowing that Georgia would go on in later years to win 2 national championships? That Rose Bowl against Oklahoma was a ton of fun. So we recap and look back on some of that with Jake Fromm here. So let's do that today as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take. And, of course, glad to have all of you with us on DawgNation Daily. And here on DawgNation Daily, time now for a Kroger Fresh Take as we'll welcome in the former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm. Jake, happy New Year to you, and glad to have you back here on DawgNation Daily again. Hope you're doing well.
Brandon, as always, glad to be here. Happy New Year to you as well. Looking for some good things, and always excited, man. Thank you.
We're recording this on a Tuesday, just after the college football playoff semifinal games on Monday night, and obviously seeing Alabama in the Rose Bowl, and frankly seeing them lose brings back, I think, positive memories for Georgia fans in the same situation back in your freshman year, 2017, getting that overtime win against Oklahoma. And I guess I'm kind of curious, Jake, for me as a sports fan, I've been a sports fan my entire life, obviously a guy very close to Georgia football there as well. One of my happiest memories of all time was that game, the trip to Pasadena, the fun involved with that, the thrilling game. Do you allow yourself, I know you're kind of in the midst of just going about your business on a day-to-day basis, but do you allow yourself to think back on memories like that and enjoy that and perhaps appreciate that within the context of really one of the special things that had happened for Georgia football to play in a game like that? How much do you look back fondly on moments like that, your own Pasadena moment way back there in 2017?
Yeah, definitely for me, as more time passes, you just kind of realize just how sweet and awesome that whole experience was. Obviously it was new for me and a lot of other people too with the program, just, being able to go out and play in a Rose Bowl. I believe the first time since 1942, maybe. I don't know. I could be wrong with that, but unbelievable experience, unbelievable just game, and just the way it all went down. And I wouldn't change a thing about it.
And so here's the other thing that kind of comes to mind for me, and I hope this makes sense the way I'm asking this. So when I'm watching like Alabama and Michigan on Monday night, going into overtime like that, you just sort of get the sense the entire world is watching this. You just sort of feel like everybody is obviously glued, these two great teams having this great conclusion. And that's kind of much the same way that you probably find yourself there back in Pasadena in that game against Oklahoma. Another example of two big brands battling against each other. Like, how much do you, I guess, ever stop to think that you've been playing athletics your entire life, whether it be like Little League baseball or, high school sports, things like that, but this is on a much bigger stage than you'd probably ever been on before, and, you're doing well, you're performing well, but you're also doing this in front of, like, the entire world watching this game at the same time. Do you feel different in the moment when it's just such obviously a bigger stage and it's just so obvious that far more people are paying attention to this game than maybe any game you've ever played before? Is it truly just like another game, or do you kind of feel the watchful eye of America on you when you're playing a game under those circumstances?
Yeah, so I would say things like that come up throughout the week, maybe even before the game. But specifically for myself, whenever the ball's kicked off and that first snap is taken on offense, hey, it doesn't matter. We're back to playing football, back to Little League football, back to middle school football, back to high school football. And you're just out playing ball with your guys. Obviously, the stakes are higher, and you know that, but man, when you can just block out everything and just go back to playing football, and that, thankfully, I was able to do that in that game. But for me, whenever I'm able to do that, I usually just find myself having a whole lot more success in games like that.
Shifting to Georgia here, 63-3 was the final. Georgia against Florida State. A little bit of a odd football game, just given just how little Florida State really showed up for it at all. What was your overall takeaway from what you saw from the Dogs against the Noles?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is just a game of motivation. Florida State had none whatsoever. Did really just felt like they didn't want to be there. And then, Kirby and the Georgia Bulldogs, they just, hey, we're going to go play. We're going to go play pissed off, right? We're pissed off that we're not in the college football playoff. We're going to show the world what we're about. Kirby does an unbelievable job of motivating those guys, getting those guys ready to play, buying into wanting to play. And to me, they just played kind of older Georgia football that I remember that was the kind of the feeling, the theme of the game. When I used to play, hey, we're just going to go smash these guys in the mouth. We're going to run the football on them. We're going to go take our shots outside. We're going to hit our shots. And we're going to, nip this game in the bud early, and they did, man. It got out of hand early. It was awesome to see all those other guys get to come in and play, get to watch Gunner come in and play. Even Jackson Muschamp got some snaps.
That's
right.
It's
just, it's fun. But a game of that magnitude should not end up that way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's right. And obviously, and air quotes around this, sort of seems like a meaningless bowl game because it's not a college football playoff game. But as you said, when Georgia shows that level of focus and motivation for the game, Jake, I do think, and I think you'll agree with me on this, I do think that speaks very well for what Georgia can be going forward, much the same way a couple of those, certainly the 2019 Sugar Bowl that you played in was, a nice springboard for the future when you take care of your business at a time in which a lot of teams maybe aren't doing the same kind of thing. I think it does sort of demonstrate one of the things that makes Georgia special.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's always kind of hey, bowl games really don't help a whole lot with recruiting and yada, yada. I don't necessarily believe that or buy into that. I think games like this can help recruiting a lot in a lot of different ways, and I think it can only help Georgia as they move on in the future because a lot of guys got to have reps, a lot of guys got to have game experience, and just being able to retain some guys. And everybody wants to be a part of a winning program, and it looks like they're going to continue to win on for a few more years for sure.
We saw Gunner Stockton get some run there to begin the second half. Georgia having such a big lead, it could substitute as much as it wanted to. He leads a couple of scoring drives. We've talked so much about Carson Beck coming back for 2024, but it's also a big year coming up for Gunner, presumably as the number 2 quarterback here for this program, and that's a spot that Carson Beck once used as a springboard to what he turned into as a very successful starter here this year. How important are the next 12 months for Gunnar Stockton, and what does he need to do to take the best possible advantage of what awaits him with a chance to get that much closer to some very real playing time, and maybe one day even the next starting quarterback at Georgia, maybe even possibly?
Yeah, man, just from, knowing Gunnar personally, man, Gunnar's a guy who he's really like a young professional already, man. He takes things serious. He's always going to be prepared. And so I really look forward to Gunnar being in that role and, man, just being ready. Like the backup quarterback position is such a unique position. And I think he will do it well. And I think the only thing he needs to do is just continue to make every single rep count that he gets. And I think, whenever he does get an opportunity, he'll be ready.
Do you ever think about your own career from the standpoint that you just stepped right in, Appalachian State game, first, game of your career, and played the rest of the time you're at Georgia, which obviously players want to play. You were glad to do that. But do you ever think about the fact that you kind of missed that experience of what you could have learned by watching and the kind of experience that you could have gotten by just, seeing a different vantage point from the sideline and, perhaps that experience, certainly you had a great career as it was, but that experience could have obviously been helpful. Do you ever think about the fact that, Carson did get some of that Gunnar has gotten some of that. As a number 2 quarterback, he may get some more of that. It seems like that ability to kind of wait in the wings and learn a little bit while you're watching from the sideline, that could be kind of valuable.
Yeah, no, it can definitely prove helpful in a lot of different ways and just allow you to learn from other people's mistakes, without having the consequences of actions, taking place. And it's definitely helped Carson a lot throughout his career. And, he was definitely he played a whole lot more maturely for the amount of game reps that he had up to that point. So it helps you and allows you to be ready, and it makes you feel a lot more comfortable in situations. But at the end of the day, there is no substitute for game reps, and game reps matter, and the sooner you can get game reps, the better off, generally, in my opinion, I think you'll be.
All right, before we let you go, I got to ask you about this. We've had so many people bring this up to us to ask you about the exchange the other day with Matthew Stafford there on the sidelines. As you had a chance to go up to speak to Stafford, and Stafford, I guess, was left feeling like a little bit of an old man after all of that, going back to his time at Georgia, which admittedly, I guess, is a little bit of a longer time ago now. Very funny thing that those NFL cameras kind of picked up on. What was your reaction to seeing so many people have so much fun with your little exchange there with Matthew Stafford on the field the other day?
Oh yeah, had no idea the cameras were there, man. The cameras did me dirty, but that's all right. It was good to finally meet him and watch him play. Just watch him play the position. He does such a great job at it. He made like 5 no-look throws in our game, and but yeah, I can't. I'm not going to take back what I said.
Sure.
I mean, I was in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade when he was playing, so it is what it is. But yeah, no, that was definitely funny, and the cameras definitely caught me in a good one there.
Well, and listen, we all get that, absolutely. That's the I think a lot of us can kind of relate to your message there and what you said, and what you also say about those cameras kind of getting there and doing you dirty a little bit. I've had other NFL players tell me that the way this kind of stuff sort of works, especially if you're on one of the teams that's on Hard Knocks or something like that, is the cameras are around so much that eventually you just sort of forget about them and you don't realize they're there. And that's how they get some of their best stuff, is that eventually the cameras just kind of become invisible after a while, and you're on enough NFL sidelines. You certainly know that there as well, that eventually you just stop noticing the cameras, and eventually they're there to kind of pick up a private conversation that you intended for it to be just between you two. You're trying to show some respect to a guy that, played the same position you did, but then the cameras are there to kind of get that private conversation, and that's kind of how the NFL gets you every now and then, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. It was definitely more of a respect thing, but yeah, to your point, for sure. Especially like with Hard Knocks, man, you either forget about them or at some point you just stop caring.
Yeah,
and guys start letting stuff rip. So yeah, they can always get you good and always seem to catch you at the right time.
Well, Jake, really good stuff. Thanks for being here as part of our Kroger Fresh Take here today. We'll obviously look forward to having you back on the show again very soon, and continue to enjoy the start to a brand new year. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, Brandon, thank you for having me. Happy New Year.
All right, good stuff, Jake. Really good stuff there with Jake Fromm, a part of a Kroger Fresh Take. Of course, glad to have him on. And important to remind you as we head towards 2024, some very fun things going on with Kroger, including your chance to be part of Kroger Chef Junior if you've got kids. This guided kids cooking experience is a wonderful thing to do if you've never done it before or if you're eager to do it again. This month, the menu item to be served up is chicken salad. So it's this Saturday and also a couple of times during the month of January, getting a chance to be a part of this with your kids, just $7 per child. In addition to making the chicken salad, which is the item for this month, there's also an incredible collection of, kind of add-ons to that there as well. A chef's hat, an apron, some kind of cool stuff, spatula, some sort of fun things the kids get to take home with them from this. Just $7 per child. And so find out more information about Kroger at KrogerChefJunior.com. That's the word junior spelled out, Junior, KrogerChefJunior.com, and be a part of this guided kids cooking experience here in 2024, including a chance to make some chicken salad this Saturday. And additionally, additional Saturdays in the month of January there as well. KrogerChefJunior.com for more on that. We're going to get Mike Griffith here coming up in just one second. Let me also get ready to cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I'm going to do this pretty quick here right now because I do want to get to Mike. We've obviously had a little bit of a different type of schedule here than normal. A couple of transfer notes to give you. We obviously talked about Julian Humphrey a little earlier. Big news across the rest of college football yesterday. Caden Salter, the very good quarterback from Liberty, he's going into the transfer portal. I'd say thus far it's been a pretty soft market for transfer quarterbacks. Cam Ward, we're led to believe, probably didn't quite get the offer he was hoping to get, so now he's flirting with going to the NFL. Ohio State, who we thought was probably pretty eager to bring in a transfer quarterback. As of yet, they haven't really gotten that guy. Florida State, who obviously needs its next quarterback, or at least more quarterbacks in that competition, seems like they're sort of settling on DJ Uiagalelei here. Kind of a soft transfer market for quarterbacks, and probably the second year in a row where that's somewhat been true. Caden Salter does change that a little bit. Salter will have a lot of suitors, you would think, after leading the Flames to a very good season, just short of undefeated after losing to Oregon on New Year's Day. And then another transfer name to give you here, too, Lance Hurd, former elite recruit offensive lineman from LSU. He is going to the transfer portal there as well. Kind of a weird vibe around LSU right now. It seems like that's been true for a couple of off seasons now, and there's some of that going on there, too. Hurd is a pretty big deal. You don't see big-time offensive linemen going to the transfer portal very much, but there will be some interest there on that, and we will make that sort of an abbreviated cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And I'll remind you to be a part of what's going to be going down in April of 2024 with our DawgNation cruise on board Allure of the Seas. I had a couple of you share. Michael Carvel shared this with me, one of our producers, and one of you also shared this with me there as well. The fact that Icon of the Seas is getting closer to being right there at the Port of Miami, getting ready to debut in January. So I'm excited about being on Icon coming up in a couple of weeks. Really looking forward to that, but also really looking forward to being on board with all of you for Allure of the Seas coming up in April for our DawgNation cruise. So Jessica Slater can tell you more about what's going to be going down with Icon of the Seas, but I want you to go to royaldogs.com, the website for the DawgNation cruise. That is going to be a place to go and really understand that we're kind of in that crunch time to kind of get ready for an amazing DawgNation cruise coming up in April of 2024. Can't wait to see all of you on board for that. RoyalDogs.com, the website to go to find out everything you need to know about the upcoming DawgNation cruise. And a guy who will be there is our next guest. It is Mike Griffith here, looking forward to the DawgNation cruise, and I'm sure looking forward to everything that's in store for UGA here in 2024. Mike, we appreciate your time. Thanks for being a little bit flexible with us here today, and of course, glad to have you as a part of the program.
Yeah, Happy New Year, BA.
Happy New Year to you there as well. So I want to start with, I guess, the news we were discussing most recently, and we'll work our way back towards Brock Bowers. So last night, a player that I think Georgia fans would have loved to have had in the mix for 2024, and Georgia itself, I believe, would have probably loved to have in the mix. Apparently not going to be the case. Julian Humphrey dropping his intention to go into the transfer portal. This is after a couple of days' worth of thought that well, maybe whatever rumblings and grumblings that had been out there about Humphrey transferring had seemed to quiet down. Humphrey himself seemed to put some of that to bed and then changed his mind apparently at the kind of the last minute here last night. What was your reaction to the Julian Humphrey news?
Competitive attrition. This is the kind of attrition that you hate. You want to see these guys stick around and compete, but, we know that, Daniel Harris was a guy that Georgia, wanted to stick around, that had originally announced he was going in the portal. But look, there's only so many playing positions. There's only so many starters. Kirby likes to have these guys compete. He plays a lot of guys. but we don't know all the details. I mean, that's what's tough about this, Brandon. We don't know how much finances impact this. We don't know how much negotiating is going on behind the scenes. We don't know the ask from the players. We don't know the tell of the coaches. So try not to judge too much, other than the fact that you've only got 2 starting cornerback positions on the team. And obviously, Julian Humphrey didn't feel comfortable one way, shape, or form. And we'll select another option.
Seems to me, just given the timeline that's out there of, I guess the portal window for Georgia actually extends a little longer here because they played their bowl game on the 30th. But if I understand the rules correctly, you have to be in the portal by the 2nd, which was yesterday, if you want to play in the SEC next year. So that would lead me to believe that Julian Humphrey is probably planning on playing somewhere in the SEC next season on the basis of, I guess, just that sort of timeline is as much as anything else. That's somewhat speculative, but I would say that's fairly informed speculation.
Yeah, time's running out on this early transfer window for Georgia. I feel like the Dogs need to add a little bit more punch themselves. Maybe there's not anybody else. We know how careful Kirby is. There's a lot of great talent that Georgia could bring in, but Brandon, we know how careful he is about the culture. And after watching what happened with Florida State and how many opt-outs they had, now you understand why. It's like Kirby says, you can withstand a few of those guys that maybe don't fit your culture because there's so many other guys that do, and the guys come in and adjust. But if you get too many transfers, it becomes a slippery slope and you lose your team culture, or it's more difficult to maintain. So it looks like whatever additions Georgia's going to make, and I don't want to speak too soon because like you said, there's still a little bit of time left, but maybe Georgia gets that 4th quarterback after spring that Kirby talked about. Maybe they add that next dynamic receiver that I think they're going to need on the perimeter with Ladd McConkey leaving, and perhaps now another defensive back will be welcomed into the clubhouse.
Yeah, because I mean, like, I am not good at some of this procedural stuff. I'm just not. I don't pretend to be. But the one thing that is not negotiable right now is the 85-man scholarship limit. And if you start doing like the sort of back of the cocktail napkin math here, I mean, Georgia's still trying to get under the 85. So it's not like they can go out there and just start grabbing more transfers here and there, at least right now, based on who we expect to be going pro, who they're obviously bringing in as part of this 2024 class, who's already announced, intentions to transfer, and who Georgia's bringing in. I mean, they're essentially like bumping right up at the 85, even with Julian Humphrey leaving. So mathematically, there's not a lot of, at least if I'm doing the math correctly in my head here, there's not a lot of room for Georgia to move here right now, just giving the 85 scholarship limitation, which is not fungible at the moment.
You know what I wonder, Brandon, and I don't know, maybe we should do a deep dive on it, but now that there's NIL money, who needs a scholarship? If they pay you enough money to pay for your own education, and from what we understand, all of the walk-ons get treated the same. Now, I think there could be some math, fuzzy math with report dates in terms of how many scholarship players could report. But truly now with NIL money and collective money, you could just pay a guy and say, hey, or take somebody, maybe a kicker or a punter or something like, say, look, you're not technically going to be on scholarship, but here's the money that pays for your education. You just don't need to report to camp when everybody else does. You can go over there on your other field and kick and punt or whatever. There just seems to be now, with the financial incentives, a way around that scholarship number.
So I agree with you from the standpoint that almost certainly somebody at Georgia is paying for school that we don't realize. There's probably somebody that we think is full scholarship Georgia that might not be, or just take Georgia out of it. At big time major college program, there's probably somebody who we think is a scholarship player that might not be because they're trying to, sort of play with that cap that's in place there. But the flip side of this, though, is that, Mike, when this kind of topic comes up of, we'll just let the NIL collective pay for the college. College is expensive. Anybody who's got college-age kids can tell you how expensive that is. That actually, that's a pretty big NIL deal. Like, if I'm going to say, well, I'm going to bring in so-and-so, we're going to make him a walk-on, but we'll have the collective pay for his school. That's a pretty big NIL deal to have, Georgia paid for a year, by collective NIL, things like that. So that's where I think this stuff gets tricky is that's significant money that we just sort of throw around flippantly sometimes. Say, oh, we'll just let the Classic City Collective pay for so and so. He doesn't have to be on scholarship. But that's what would it cost, $40,000-$50,000 a year to go to Georgia or something like that. That's money that can't go towards something else if you're paying there on that. So I'm not quite so sure that's necessarily the quick simple fix, because as people of a certain age can tell you, paying for your kid's college is pretty expensive here.
Oh, it's unbelievable. And, obviously at Georgia, they get a great education, but as far as Georgia's money goes now, Brandon, I mean, the value of Carson Beck, debate what you want. This guy's worth millions of dollars. And what is the value when you consider how important it is to have a quarterback like that to get back to the playoff? Or how important is it, how much money would you have offered Ladd McConkey to come back? I mean, these are irreplaceable players. These are difference-making players. And when you get into the big bucks of college football and what we're talking about, tens of millions of dollars of television revenue, tens of millions of dollars of bowl payout, hundreds of millions of dollars of donation and athletic department funds. At the end of the day, football is your revenue generator and has incredible value. So it's an investment into these players, just like it's an investment into the coaches. I'm with you. I see you rub your head just like I do, and it all makes you want to split your head open. Why can't it just be as simple as 85 scholarships for 4 years? But the reality is all these players now are on a year-to-year unrestricted free agent deal in college football, and it's got to be crazy difficult for Kirby Smart to manage this team.
Hold off on the Brock Bowers thing for a moment, and let's look at the other stuff that could be out there. I believe the draft declaration is the 15th, I think. It's coming up here in a couple of weeks, I guess. You're still kind of looking to see, okay, well, are there any surprise NFL draft declarations for Georgia? I sort of don't think there will be, but that's also what makes it a surprise if it happens when you don't expect it. But, we are still in the midst of, having, official announcements like Cedric Von Granger. Eventually that's coming. We know that's the case, but there are these sort of like, probably won't, but maybe, guys like Ra Thomas or Dominic Lovett, or maybe there's somebody else, I guess Tate Ratledge, that there are still the thoughts here. Seeing what happens with Nazir Stackhouse and Warren Brinson. There is still a little bit of news still yet to come for Georgia. I'm assuming we hear less about transfers here moving forward, but we still have a lot of will they or won't they stuff to do when it comes to some of these NFL draft decisions, although it seems like now some of these are fairly well foreshadowed.
Yeah, at the moment at least, and things can always change, Brandon. But talking with Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl last night, he said it was his understanding that Nazir Stackhouse, Tate Ratledge are coming back. I mean, these are guys that would have been invited to that all-star game, and Carson Beck certainly would have too. Conversely, Cedric Van Pran, as you said, has accepted the invite. He did that long ago. I think it's a given that he's gone. I guess it's a new thing now where even if we know they're leaving, they're going to do some sort of graphic announcement. I don't know. Seems to me I'd want to see some average. If I was an NIL guy, I'd be like, well, put my logo on there when you do it. But right now it just looks like a Georgia thank you, goodbye, thing on social media. This has become the gift card of our modern day society, apparently, or the thank you notes. To me, the key guys coming back. I mean, I really like it. If this is as of now, as we do this program on January 3rd, Stackhouse, Brinson coming back. Could this be the Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt repeat from those special players that came back to improve their draft stock from second-day guys, as I believe Warren and Nazir would have been, into first-round draft picks? Offensive line, Tate Ratledge coming back. This is big. I think Tate's a preseason All-American. I think he could be an Outland Trophy candidate. Don't know the status of Xavier Truss. This would be a very interesting player to come back and a necessary piece. You see the importance of championship depth. We saw that this year when JDJ went down. And yes, that was a freshman out there getting beat on 1st and 20 for a 28-yard touchdown against Alabama. That doesn't happen to Georgia when there's quality depth or experienced depth. So every player that comes back is really important, Brandon. The two that got away that I bemoan for Georgia, because these are guys that are just special difference-making guys that I believe are going to be gotten for the cheap. They're going to go on the second day when I believe that Ladd McConkey and Javon Bullard are first-round talents. Hate that those guys left for Georgia, but at the same time, these are two guys that gave it all. These are two champions. These are two players that are fan favorites that had incredible careers, memorable moments that you'll never forget. But that was tough because, to win championships, you got to try to keep those second and third rounders around to make that, to become first rounders. Those are the difference makers. I don't think you're going to be able to replace Bullard or McConkey through the portal.
Yeah, certainly we'll be watching that. And obviously the other big news from yesterday, and we spent a lot of time off the top of the show discussing this, that's the departure of Brock Bowers. And I know, Mike, you and I have talked about this plenty. I know you're right there on the same page with me on all this. This is one of the all-time great college careers. And I'm really thankful I got a chance to see it. I think you can tell the story in a number of different ways. You could do a highlight video that tells the story. You could look at the statistical prowess that would tell the story. The kind of first-person accounts of guys like Todd Hartley, who we heard from last week, and obviously Kirby Smart throughout the years, that there are a lot of different ways to chronicle what Bowers was. I don't think any of it is overstated. This is one of the greatest careers that we've seen, certainly in the modern college football era, one of the great dogs of all time, truly, genuinely. And I am very, very thankful that I got a chance to see what Brock Bowers was in a Georgia football uniform.
Boy, I agree with you, Brandon. I told Josh Brooks yesterday, this has got, when you guys get around to building statues, 34, 19, and 99, they right at the top of the list for me, Jordan Davis, Brock Bowers, Herschel Walker, and I know there were some greats like Charlie Trippi before as well. Hopefully Georgia gets to that point. I really, really want to see Georgia get to that point of putting some statues or some memorials around Smart Sanford Stadium. Yes, I do want to name the stadium after Kirby Smart as well. Because this is special. Doggone it, it's special. And I know that they got robbed of this glory this year, but this 29-game win streak and this 3-year run, and Brandon, I'm going to do my darndest over the next few days to put this down on paper and show everyone this is the greatest 3-year run of modern era college football. And I go from 1966 for modern era. Okay. Some people might go back to, the 85 scholarship man limit, I think around 1990. I go back to 66. This is this is better than the Nebraskas that you saw in the 90s. This is better than the Alabamas that you've seen. And Brock Bowers, what he was, I called him Superman. He's a hero. He was a guy that when Georgia was in distress, you throw the ball to this guy. And like Tim Tebow said, most of the time when you throw a tight end screen, it's a 10-yard gain. But when you throw it to this guy, he could take it 90. Ben Watson called him the Michael Jordan of tight ends, as did the opponents, as did Mark Stoops. I mean, think about this. They're comparing a college football tight end to Michael Jordan, who I consider the greatest competitor of my lifetime. The greatest game changer, the most reliable guy in the clutch. Because how many times did we see Brock Bowers take over games? I think the Auburn game this year was a fantastic example that, finally Carson Beck found him. I forget who said Bobo was screaming in his headset all day that he was open. Carson finally finds him. And Brock has 4 catches for over 100 yards, or perhaps Georgia falls victims on the plane as Alabama nearly did before the Milroe miracle and recently turned into the Milroe meltdown against Michigan, by the way. But every time you needed Brock Bowers, even when they lost to Alabama, think about this. Even when they lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game in 2021, Brock Bowers had 10 catches for 139 yards. And he was targeted 15 times. I mean, this guy was unstoppable. When I talked with the TCU defense about him, I said, what happened? They said 19 happened. We did so much to try to cover this guy. We couldn't even get lined up. So I could go on and speak emphatically and in a deep voice that he is absolutely the greatest tight end to play college football.
I'm glad you mentioned the TCU game because there's the other thing that goes on that Georgia has always been very eager to create the appearance of an ensemble cast. They don't want any one player to stand out in front of another. In fact, a lot of times during the 2022 season, Mike, and you'll remember this, when Kirby would be asked about Brock, Kirby oftentimes would pivot to Darnell Washington. Well, yeah, we think Brock's a good tight end, but we think Darnell Washington's a good tight end too. And that's just a very Georgia way of doing things because Darnell was doing sort of a thankless task of being a great blocker. And so therefore they wanted to make sure they threw some flowers his direction because they wanted him to feel like he was a part of it. And sometimes I believe that Georgia intentionally tried to go away from Bowers because they wanted other guys involved. I mean, think about the big games that Georgia had where Like the big win against Tennessee, I think that Bowers had 3 catches. The big win against Oregon, 49-3, Bowers had like 2 catches that day. I want to say that there were some very big performances from Georgia where Bowers was not a very big part of it, because I do believe that Georgia wanted to get the ball to other guys. They didn't want to be sort of a one-man show. But the TCU game, there was nothing left to play for. There was nothing left to save. There was no reason to hold anything back. And Bowers had darn near 200 yards receiving that day. That's one of those things where when Georgia really didn't have much of a need to pretend to be something that it wasn't, it just let Brock Bowers go out there and show out. And he had darn near 200 yards receiving in a national championship game. He really did transcend the tight end position and became as valuable to me as any pass catcher that's played in college football during the era in which Brock has played.
He was fantastic. And I don't blame Stetson Bennett 1 minute for looking for number 19 every chance that he got and riding that horse. An incredible statistic from Brock's career, and kind of really makes me hate that he missed that Missouri game. Brandon, he scored a touchdown on every SEC team he played against, except for Missouri. And he didn't get to play Missouri. That I have no doubt in my mind he would have scored. It's almost like, as quiet as Brock Bowers was, that there was some chart, some box he's checking off. Every team he's going to score on, every game he's going to win. Such a tremendous competitor. And the fact that the decision took a little extra long, it makes me wonder if somewhere behind the scenes people are going, Brock, you've got to leave. You've got to leave. We know you want to go back, but you got to leave. Same thing with McConkey. These were really hard decisions for these players because of what Kirby's built. And how fantastic is it that a player from Northern California finds his way to Georgia amid this, this whole period of the pandemic, and turns into this incredible story that none of us could have seen coming. I don't think anyone out west saw that coming as well either. They're beside them. How does this happen? I said, well, I'll tell you how it happens. Chris Milton, Kendall Milton's dad, says to the Georgia staff, hey, there's another guy out here. And then he tells Bowers about what this program they've stumbled upon. And that's just good stuff when you're able to recruit that way through word of mouth. And certainly the legend of Brock Bowers. I hate that it didn't end the way that we wanted it to. It was a gallant effort to see him out there playing injured. We'll always wonder what might have been if they could have found a way to beat Alabama, if they could have found their way into the playoff. I think Georgia probably would have won the national championship if they could have found a way to win in Atlanta in December.
All right, Mike, I know you'll have plenty coming up at DawgNation.com in the days to come about all of what's coming next for Georgia, and there's always something coming next this time of year. So we'll look forward to reading that from you then. And, of course, back here again on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management there as well. Mike, thanks for your time. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Brandon.
Good stuff there from Mike Griffith, and I certainly appreciate him as well, kind of being flexible with us, because I know we were a little bit different type of thing today, time-wise and everything else, but I appreciate Mike there on all of that. I also appreciate our friends at the Finish Long Drink. You've had weeks like we've had around here, a little Finish Long Drink certainly goes well with whatever you've got going on. Many of you made it a big part of your New Year's celebrations, and as you look forward to fun stuff coming up here in 2024, I know you'll take the Finish Long Drink along with you, because it makes every occasion even more fun. So go to thelongdrink.com. You can find out where you can pick some up, whether it's for a limited time, the peach-flavored version of the Finish Long Drink here in the Peach State, or the Long Drink Traditional, the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick, the Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. The truth is, given my penchant for Christmas cookies and things like that, it's probably sort of Long Drink Zero season for me here right now, just given the fact I feel like I've gained a pretty good bit of weight since Christmas. So we'll get that figured out, but we'll use a little Long Drink Zero to help us out with all of that. Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. Long Drink Cranberry. The ladies in my neighborhood love that. A lot of folks in my neighborhood love all of that. So let's find more online, thelongdrink.com, and you can make the Finish Long Drink a big part of all the great stuff you have going on here in 2024. All right, we're going to wrap things up. No fight song to close us out today, but nonetheless, we will close us out in style here instead. And I saw some funny stuff online. I want to give a golden shoe to this. Somebody shared this with me. Obviously, Alabama lost again. We're not through making fun of Alabama for that at the hands of the Michigan Wolverines in the Rose Bowl. We'll be spiteful on that. But We Are Dog Nation sent this to me. He tagged me, and I guess HBTFD1 also kind of was a part of this there too. It's a Netflix documentary. It says Rebuilding Year Season 4 for for Alabama and Nick Saban coming on August 31st. That's pretty funny stuff. Obviously, rebuilding year was the excuse that Nick Saban made after they didn't win the national championship 2021, and they hadn't won a national championship since then either. Of course, Georgia's going to come up a little bit short here this year too, but that's not going to stop us from twisting the knife a little bit for Alabama, who seems to be in kind of a prolonged rebuilding year, at least at the national championship level. So pretty funny stuff from We Are Dog Nation, and certainly golden shoe worthy here today. And how about those lousy, stinking Gators? Boy, they're not even trying to rebuild anymore, it doesn't seem like. It just seems like they're just sort of making the best of what is. Losing seasons, long drought against Georgia. In fact, it's been 1,152 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten UGA. And that number is going to keep on going up and up and up for a long time to come. We love the thought of that. We'll make that our Gator Hater Updater. And we appreciate all of you being with us here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We will look forward to speaking to you again tomorrow. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, we're going to take your comments. I cannot go as long today, though, as I have the last couple of days. It's actually put us in a little bit of a bind, when we go as long as we have. But we'll still have some fun here and do some stuff like that. I have been kind of monitoring the YouTube chat. I just happen to have it up. Y'all have been going back and forth today. Y'all have been going back and forth. So I'm going to see if I can come in here and calm the tension in the YouTube comment section here a little bit. Thomas Bolton, the subject of Trevor Etienne. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these Florida fans, and listen, this is just sort of fan 101 of good riddance. We don't want him. Well, guess what? If Florida fans don't want Trevor Etienne, Georgia fans are more than happy to scoop in and take him. There's no doubt about that. Jonathan Aaron says, BA in the NFL, do you think they will keep Bowers as a tight end or move him to wide receiver? Also, if you had to make a pick, would you move up for a Harrison or Bowers? Last question, who would you pick? So, I mean, I think that Brock Bowers has a chance to have absolutely every bit the career that Marvin Harrison Jr. can have at the next level. Absolutely, I would do that. As far as would I move up to want to draft him, I mean, the problem with moving up is that, most of these teams, they're sort of desperate to trade up, end up regretting that because that means there's a lot of draft capital you're not really getting a whole lot of use out of. But I do believe that Brock Bowers is set up to have as sensational an NFL career as he's had a college career. I do. And I think it's going to be fun to see him drafted very, very high. And I know there was the weird thing the other day about one of those so-called draft experts was like, wanted to, couldn't wait to see Brock Bowers in an NFL system because he wasn't thrilled with how he was used at Georgia. Like there was a time that you could have probably said that about a, program like Georgia. Now it used tight ends. I'm talking about going back years ago, but no one uses tight ends better than Georgia does right now. It's just ridiculous. And so ridiculous anyway that Todd Hartley stepped up and spoke out against that. So this is an example of, I mean, it's kind of funny. I was going to do this today. We just didn't quite have the structure to be able to do it, but you could go back years ago. I'm talking about like 2018, 2019, somewhere around that time. One of the things that Kirby Smart used to get salty about during press conferences, and some of y'all remember this, one of the things that Smart used to get salty about was, how come you don't use the tight ends more? And Kirby would always get really, really just sort of angry about that particular question. And in fact, Mark Richt at times would get sort of angry about that too, because the truth is it's actually a little bit difficult to use tight ends. That tight ends oftentimes are going to be sort of like the third read or something like that. And for all we want to say about, this quarterback, he goes to his fourth progression, most of the time that's not really true. I mean, what we sort of perceive to be, this guy's reading the whole field, he's going fourth progression. For the most part, that's not really true. There's a little bit of an exaggeration about some of that kind of stuff. There's a lot of dummy routes and things like that. But really getting tight ends involved effectively in an interesting way is one of the things that college offenses for a long time have struggled to be able to do. And so if you look at NFL teams using tight ends and college teams using tight ends, historically NFL teams have been better at using tight ends than college teams have, but just because it's more complicated offenses, it's older quarterbacks, therefore they're a little bit more sophisticated and just a little bit more, I guess, precise route running. I don't even know. But NFL teams historically are better at using tight ends than college teams have been. But when we said to start our show today that Bauer sort of redefined the college position, all of a sudden now it's not really the case. This idea, once Bowers gets out of this college offense into this pro offense, now we can see how good he really is. That's not the case anymore. That Georgia is as sharp about how it uses its tight ends as any of these NFL teams are. And that was clearly true when Todd Monken was the offensive coordinator, but it's still true for Mike Bobo being offensive coordinator here right now, is that Georgia uses tight ends like an NFL team would. In Georgia's ability to get these interesting routes for guys like Bowers, but not just Bowers. And in addition to that, I mean, I always remember, Eric Gilbert. And obviously, the Gilbert career didn't quite go the way that Georgia fans would like for it to. But when Gilbert was a recruit in the class of 2019, there was a statement that he made that I'll always remember. He talked about, going to a place like Georgia, he didn't want to run what he called just stick routes. He didn't want to run stick routes. And what a stick route is, let's say it's 3rd and 5, you run 5 yards and turn around, you sort of stand there. It's essentially a dump off play. And in Gilbert's mind, that's all Georgia had been prior to this, was just a bunch of stick routes. You just go to the line, the marker, you turn around and just sort of wait for the football if the quarterback can't find a wide receiver to throw to. Well, guess what? These Georgia tight ends these days, they're not running stick routes. They're running completely different stuff now. They're running more complicated, interesting routes, and it's a more sort of intricate part of the Georgia offense. So this idea that, Bowers, I don't know, I'm going off a tangent here, but the idea that Bowers is going to go to the NFL and have his true potential unlocked, I don't quite think that's the case anymore, given how good Georgia's become and how it uses its tight ends. Let's see what else. Pizza Man on the subject of Georgia being too conservative. In terms of how it defended, what he's talking about is the SEC championship against Milroe. I have to say that I just think that's the case. And I do believe that if Georgia wants to get back to being great again defensively, it's got to be a little bit more aggressive defensively. I just do. In 2022, what Georgia was on a per game basis, sort of less aggressive, I perceive, up front defensively, unless they were playing a good team. When Georgia played Tennessee in 2022, got after Hendon Hooker. Even in a game when they gave up a bunch of points to Ohio State, they still kind of got after Stroud that day. And the few times they were able to bring him down, I believe was really instrumental in helping Georgia win that game. It was not a good day for Georgia defensively, but they were aggressive when they really had to be in that particular spot. That's one of the reasons why they were able to win that game. And obviously, TCU, things like that Georgia just sort of proved the ability to be pretty aggressive when it needed to be. I don't think that Georgia was nearly aggressive enough against Jalen Milroe. They were way too deferential to a player that's just not worth it. I mean, Bill Milroe's good, and his legs make him dangerous. Any running quarterback is dangerous. But Jalen Milroe's not a special player. The game against Michigan sort of showed you that. I know he had some issues with some low snaps that day, and I do truly understand that if your quarterback worried about getting the snap, then that's taking your eyes off of where you need to be defensively. I do get that. But, Georgia essentially were led to believe, kind of had that sort of double spy look on Milroe, essentially limiting what it would do defensively because it wanted to limit what Milroe could do with his legs. And I just don't think that was a very effective game plan. And Michigan, who may just be better up front this year than Georgia was. Michigan was really good up front defense. That is true. Maybe just better up front. But they also got after Jalen. They had 6 sacks that day. Georgia needed to replicate that game plan. And if they did, they probably would have won. Even with the terrible call on the Isaiah Bond catch and the Dylan Bell fumble and the penalty that results in a missed field goal. Even with that, if Georgia could have had a better game plan against Milroe, they probably would have won the game. Jonathan Aaron says, besides Bowers, who is the other person you think will test top tier at the combine? For Georgia, that's a good question. I mean, I'll tell you this. I think the one thing that's going to open some people's eyes about Ladd McConkey is Ladd McConkey is going to leap pretty high, I believe, when you do the vertical jump. I think that McConkey will test pretty well on that, and I think that people will probably like that about him. Taylor Russell says the Beck fumble haunts my dreams. Yeah, it does. Because it's honestly like a horror movie. Like in the horror movie, the person's like sitting there and they don't see the person over their shoulder. Michael Myers is sort of like looking through a window and the person can't see them. That's the way the Beck Bell fumble worked in the SEC championship, because we could all see the football laying on the turf, but Beck couldn't see it. Oh my gosh, that's so hard to watch. Oh my gosh. Where like Beck's you're trying to be casual because you're trying to like conceal the play. So Beck sort of casually does the end around handoff to Bell. Bell loses his grip on the ball, and the ball is just sitting there on the turf. and Beck doesn't realize it. Oh my gosh, it's like a horror movie. It's so hard to watch because we're all aware of something that he wasn't able to see. Jim Kay also points out this, and this is really true, that McConkey won't have a great 40 time compared to some others. That's true. But his short shuttle time ought to be elite. And I will tell you, I've been to Georgia Pro Day before. And watching these athletes do the short shuttle is really very interesting to see. And it really does, I think, demonstrate a pretty important part of what makes football, like what makes good football players. That ability over the course of a small space to make a very athletic move. Like that really is football in a nutshell. Like a lot of these sort of like, call them like underwear Olympics and things like that. A lot of this kind of stuff, you're sort of left to wonder, how much does this actually even replicate football? That short shuttle deal, that's kind of what football is. And I do expect Ladd to do pretty well on that too. Lee Underwood says that Laster could surprise in the draft. I mean, I expect Kamari Laster to be a first-round pick. So I expect that to be the case. Slingblade Napier says that Thorson may be eligible for a red shirt next year. I think meaning he won't have to punt. That's kind of funny. DT also pointing out something very important, that Todd Monken is showing out in the NFL. He knows how to use Lamar Jackson better than his previous offensive coordinators in Baltimore. Yeah, like Todd Monken is a very good offensive mind. He is. Georgia was lucky to have him. It obviously worked out great for both parties. You know, Monken, I think, had kind of gotten on the bad list in the NFL a little bit, and I think he'd probably even admit that. Probably did not handle himself in Cleveland as well as he possibly could have. He's frustrated. Sometimes professionally, you just get frustrated. We all have, you know, some understanding of that. That he was frustrated professionally, probably didn't, you know, necessarily behave, you know, around that frustration as well as he could have. Was probably unhireable after the 2019 season. Kind of people had sort of soured on him. He needed a little bit of a career boot. He came to Georgia. Kirby Smart does not have a lot of duds on his resume at Georgia, but hiring James Coley to be offensive coordinator is an all-time dud. It just is. It just goes to show you that nobody bats 1,000. Kirby Smart may be batting like 980 for his career at Georgia, but he is not batting 1,000 because James Coley is not an offensive coordinator. And Georgia offensively in 2019 was a disaster. And they needed a dramatic upgrade. And so Todd Monken provided that. Now, what's funny is that the 2020 season is sort of lost to time because it should be. We're all looking to erase that from our memories. At least most of us are. But Monken was even pretty good in 2020 because Georgia was playing a much tougher schedule, SEC teams week after week, and they were already better offensively when they had like the craziest quarterback situation ever. And so it was already pretty obvious that Todd Monken was a sharp offensive guy because Georgia had nothing but weirdness in 2020, and they were actually scoring more points against SEC teams they had the previous years. So that was all you needed to know. Okay, Monken's a pretty good offensive coordinator. And took them a second in 2021 season because they had, you know, once again, the sort of weirdness of whatever JT Daniels was. And then when they started clicking, it was on. It was on and popping, as the kids like to say. And Georgia clearly got great benefit out of their Todd Monken time. And now Monken's gone back to the NFL, which is where he always wanted to be. People are free to want what they want. Monken wanted the NFL, and now he's back where he was. And his time at Georgia has propelled him for that. Now you're left to wonder, okay, Monken's not the youngest dude in the world, but also not the oldest. Is Todd Monken going to become an NFL head coach? Because typically when you have this kind of success, you do become the kind of guy that, you know, could be, I would think, in conversation to become an NFL head coach. And listen, Monken was never going to be a college coach because you've got to be somewhat presidential to be a college coach. You've got to want the, you know, kissing babies and the shaking hands. And Todd Monken was not about that life. Todd Monken was not about, I mean, you saw interviews that we did with Monken. We interviewed him in LA last year, and we had to bleep like half the interview because he's just not going to filter himself. He's just not going to do that. And there is still an element where the college coach has to filter himself a little bit. NFL, I don't think anybody cares. And so I don't think that Monken could have ever been a college head coach. I don't believe he wants to be. But could he be an NFL head coach? I believe he might be. It's a little bit like the Joe Brady thing, where like, you know, Brady would be revered in college football, but he doesn't want any part of it. And now I think he's having success, you know, again with the Buffalo Bills as a play caller. But Monken could have been anywhere in college the rest of his life when you're scoring points the way that he was. He just doesn't want that. But maybe, given what he's doing in Baltimore right now, maybe he could be an NFL head coach. Maybe so. Randy Hall said, where did Georgia place on the Joe Moore? So they were finalists again, right? But they did not win it. But they were finalists, right? BMAC also says, makes you wonder who votes for the Joe Moore and the coach of the year. Seems like Georgia gets passed over. And I get that. But in this particular case, I mean, look, Georgia should have won the Joe Moore Award in probably 2021 and 2022, I believe, anyway. I'm not going to stand on the table about it this year necessarily. As far as the coach of the year thing goes, like, I get that sort of sticks in some people's craw, but this is the way that coach of the year works in every sport. The coach of the best team almost never wins coach of the year. That's just not the way that coach of the year kind of works anymore. But I do get the people who get sort of frustrated about that. Let me try to go to Facebook here for a moment. I've got like 85 browsers open. Let me see if I can figure out a way to do this on Facebook for a moment. And then we're going to wrap up after that. Boy, it's got when my computer just takes forever to do anything. All right, here we go. On Facebook for a second here. Eventually. Slowly but surely we're getting there. All right, here we go. Now we got some comments. There we go. Ira Brashad checks in to say how funny perspective is. For 40 years, I kept saying, I just need to see us win one more national title. Then we win one, win two. Now we can't get enough of this. Yeah, Ira, that's a good point. It's pretty addictive after you get a chance to do that, for sure. Gerald Harmon's shouting out Chubb Strong. You like that? Jamie Huff says Monken ain't too great without a quarterback that can bail him out. Lamar Jackson has one MVP and is leading for it last year before injury. Yeah, I think you and I may have a little bit of a different opinion about Monken. I like Todd a lot as a play caller. Ken Holcomb says, I missed a few days because my mother went to be with her Lord and Savior. We buried her yesterday. I'm so sorry for that, Ken. I know you've been through a lot this year. He says, please pray for our family and the many friends who knew and loved my amazing mama. Still doesn't seem real. Well, Kent, I certainly will do that. I am very sorry. I know you've been through a lot this year, but I know how happy your memories of your mom must be, and so we will certainly keep you in our prayers on all of that. Kent, we absolutely will, and we're glad to have you back as a part of the show here right now. Bill Sanders says, I wonder if Monken's another one of those guys who's a great coordinator but makes a lousy head coach. Could very well be that's the case. I also think the job of being an NFL coach is a little bit different kind of thing. Harold Franco says the Falcons need Monken for a head coach. Listen, I'll take anything over Arthur Smith right now. I really will. I know the Falcons are technically still alive for the playoffs, but I just believe it's imperative they move on from Arthur Smith. I've never really been a Smith fan, and I think it's imperative they move off of him. I do. Jacob O'Neill says, how about shaking babies and kissing hands? A reference to the Dukes of Hazzard. Listen, you had me at hello when it comes to the Dukes of Hazzard. I can promise you that. William Camacho says that Monken's 57. He says the same age as me. Well, there you go, William. I appreciate that. Good stuff. So certainly not by no means too old to be an NFL head coach, not by a long shot. Let's see what else is going on here on Facebook. Marshall Fleming says the Michigan defensive line was better in 2021 than they are this year. 3 first-round picks. Bennett rolled out of the pressure and beat them. Yeah, he had a great game against Michigan for sure. And, yeah, by like sort of draft status, it seems like the Michigan guys probably were better in 2021. But based on overall performance, I mean, look, I am more than happy to kind of do the Michigan overrated thing, Big Ten overrated thing. Those guys had a good day against Alabama. That's a tough offensive line to have a good day against. I mean, even me, begrudgingly, you got to give a little bit of credit for what they were able to do the other night. Let's see what else is going on here on the Facebook side of things. Michael Brostom wondering if Brock Bowers is going to end up in Philadelphia. Maybe that's the case. I will say this, too. It's like the Philadelphia situation, man, that's gotten really weird really fast, right? Where, like, I mean, what I know about the NFL could fit on the head of a penny, but it seems like Eagles fans have really soured on Nick Sirianni as the head coach a bit. And so you almost wonder, well, is Philadelphia actually where you want to be right now? Maybe. I mean, I still think that the leadership there the Howie Roseman, the GM, is still as respected as ever. But it seems like Sirianni, after the kind of late season collapse of the Eagles, boy, it seems like Sirianni's kind of in the crosshairs a bit. I like Kana's comment here, and we'll see if I pronounce your last name correctly. Kana Malakowski, his last name correctly. Kana Malakowski saying, "Hope Kirby is keeping the team together, so when Michigan gets ruled ineligible due to cheating on Thursday, we're ready to take on Washington." There you go, Kana. And I hope I pronounced your name correctly. He makes a really good comment there. First of all, we didn't do this in the show today. We just didn't really have time to. But Kana, how about Connor Stalions being at the game the other day? Like, that is, it's been confirmed, I believe, that was Stalions and he was there. Like, how crazy is that? That, they're so seemingly unrepentant for what they've been through. Just pretty wild. And there's clearly going to be a little bit of a protest against Michigan if they do win the national championship. Yeah, so kick them out, move Georgia in, or declare Georgia as the people's champions if Michigan does win it because of what they've been through. Kana, I like that comment. I think that's pretty good. Gary Holt says, do you think the SEC is going to beat each other up next year? I think injuries and depth is going to be big. Look, I think there's a very good chance we never have an undefeated college football playoff champion ever again after this season. I think it's quite possible that if you look at the average number of losses for a Super Bowl champ playing a 19 or 20 game season, and then, sort of multiply that by 0.75, that's going to probably be the average number of losses for a college football champion playing what will be a 16-game schedule. It's going to be 14-2 national champions a lot in the future because, once again, I'm as big an SEC homer as there is. Teams like Georgia, playing a much tougher schedule next year because of the addition of Texas going on the road to Alabama. But look at Michigan's schedule next year. It's a very tough schedule too. That the Big Ten, and look, I mean, Ohio State gave Georgia a run for the money last year. Michigan beat Alabama this year. The top of the Big Ten's pretty good. The rest of the league, pretty terrible. The top of the Big Ten's pretty good. You have to admit that. And to a league that already has two championship contending teams near the top, you're adding Oregon and Washington, which next year could compete to be the best teams in the Big Ten. That the best Big Ten teams are also playing much tougher schedules there as well. So if you told me right now I can have 12-2 for Georgia next year, would I take 12-2 right now? I believe I probably would. And if you told me this year, hey, BA, how about 10-2 regular season from Georgia? Heck no, I would not have taken that. Heck no. How about after the SEC championship, you can be, 11-2? Heck no, would not have taken that. I'm not even sure I would have really taken 12-1. Like, you really probably won't. I mean, as it turns out, you did need to be 13-0 to really guarantee yourself a spot in the playoff. That in previous eras of the college football playoff, you wouldn't have been willing to concede losses at all. But next year, it seems obvious to me that Georgia will not go undefeated. And it's a little bit like talking about your favorite NFL team for those of you that have them. Look at the 3 road games. Ole Miss, Bama, Texas. If Georgia can win 2 of those 3, you got to be popping champagne bottles. I really do think that. And look, maybe it end up not being what I think it's going to be, and maybe a team like Georgia could go undefeated or somebody else can go undefeated. There are some teams that play easier schedules than others. For instance, next year, Ohio State, I believe, actually has a pretty easy schedule, all things being equal. There are some teams that play easier schedules. Ole Miss probably has a little bit of an easier schedule compared to some of what we're talking about here. But for the most part, 12-2 puts you right where you want to be, or I should say 10-2, regular season puts you right where you want to be for the postseason in most instances. I really do believe. And I was on with our friends in 960 The Ref this morning. We are talking about this a little bit, that the typical offseason is, where's Georgia going to be ranked and whatever else. Y'all, this year's offseason is mostly going to be spent wrapping our minds around what the new year is going to look like and feel like, with national quarterfinal games, with buys, with teams hosting playoff games, with much tougher schedules. The ability to determine who's going to play in the SEC championship game next year is much harder. We know this for a fact because the Pac-12 and the Big 12 have not had divisions for a little while now. And as someone who's a college football obsessive, I can tell you that mid-November, there's like about 4 or 5 different scenarios, typically speaking, for those leagues in terms of who's going to play for the conference title game. That is going to be much more difficult than we're used to. So y'all get it. Y'all better be ready to buckle up here, because the good news is that Georgia is a very central part of the conversation that's about to occur. But the weird news is this conversation is going to be unlike anything we've ever had before. Now, that energizes me. That excites me. I'm ready for something that's different than what this slop has been this year. I'm ready for that. But it is going to be very, very different. And the fetish this sport has had with a 0 in the loss column, that is over. That is done with. All right, final comments. William Camacho also pointing out that Brock will not be going to the Eagles because Brock will be a top 5 pick, which is very good. Gerald Harmon says, I want to see how the bowl games work with the playoffs. Yeah, so Gerald, this may be one of those things that sort of changes slowly, but then suddenly, whereas, look, long story short, because I'm running late on time, long story short is that I think that once certain teams get a taste of hosting a playoff game, I think they're going to want to host more playoff games. And so the neutral site stuff may just slowly disappear over time. I think there's a chance that's true, but that's not going to be immediate. Philip Jordan Wells giving you a little bit of a shout out to, I believe this is a Van Halen reference from him with Panama. I believe that's a Van Halen reference. Marshall Fleming also reminding the 2021 Michigan team set a sack record. That's interesting. I had not remembered that, Marshall. That's interesting. Let's see what else. Joseph Kennedy also pointing out, we talked about earlier, the Eagles have kind of fallen in some hard times here. So I said all of what I said about the fact that, it's going to be tougher schedules. The national champion may have 2 losses. And Zach Adams says, Georgia is going to be the first team to go 16-0 and win the national championship. So therefore, it only took us about 15 seconds to sort of move past the challenges that are on our way to already have grand proclamations made by Zach in here, which I think is very good. Zach, well done on your part there on all of that. All right, let us do a couple more comments. Let me see what I can find here. On DawgNation.com. DT says Dan Orlovsky and Ryan Clark threw as many flowers as the Rose Bowl parade at Todd Monken after the Ravens hung 56 on the Dolphins. Yeah, the Ravens are probably the best team in the sport right now. They're probably the best team in the sport. And John Harbaugh is a very good head coach, too. He really is a very good head coach. And Monken is doing a great job as offensive coordinator. Really, I mean, it's just a thing. It's just a true thing. And I guess I'm happy for him, right? Because, I do think that, that's a DGD. That's a guy who came in and pushed a lot of right buttons for you for 2 years or 3 years and helped you win 2 national championships. That's a good deal. Wildman Slayer says Nico needs to run through his this is Nico Imaleva, needs to run through his possessions better. And if his first guy is not open, he pulls it down and runs. I'd say that's fairly common for a quarterback making his first start, I believe. I thought Nico looked pretty good. I thought there were some people who overstated how good he looked, like Peter Burns, who I like, but was like falling all over himself. Oh, I thought that was a little bit much from Peter, to be completely frank, and others who kind of joined in some of that. I thought he was good. I thought he was certainly good enough to give Tennessee fans something to be excited about for the upcoming offseason. And frankly, I thought he looked pretty good when he did run it. He's skinny as a weed, but still a pretty good, running quarterback nonetheless. Makes you wonder why he didn't play more on a team that was, pretty lackluster with Joe Milton for most of the year. So I thought that he was good. I thought that some people overstated how well he played. But certainly if you're a Tennessee fan, you want to hang your hat on what he can be in his second year coming up in 2024. You've got every right to do that, I would say. Let us see what else. Jonathan Aaron says that Bullard will just go to the combine and show his hit on Marvin Harrison Jr. Ellis. Those big thumping safeties, there's a lot of value for that in the NFL, no doubt about it. G. Grace Boy says, don't be jealous. Tennessee's got a study quarterback. Good luck to all of us. I don't know that I'm jealous here. I thought he had a good day, and I do think the Tennessee fans are justified in being excited about him. I am going to hold off a little bit on grand proclamations that he's even maybe that's one of your 9 elite quarterbacks you gave us yesterday, G. Maybe that's one of the cases. But clearly he's a big-time quarterback prospect, no doubt about that. Kirby Skaki says, I would take Beck over Nico any day. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't believe there's any doubt about that. Jim K says that Bullard needs to add some size. Maybe that's the case. G. Greg's Bama Boy says he would not take Beck over Nico. Yeah, Sam, I think you're wrong about that. Now clearly G, and I know y'all don't want to hear this, but it's true. G's going to have a little bit of bragging rights over us over the upcoming year because Alabama did beat Georgia, right? And we've had that on him for 2 years. And he's in the comment section every day. So we've had that over him the last 2 years. He's going to have a little bit of bragging rights over us because his team did win. But it's also an example of just how quickly you can allow some of that kind of go to your head, where it's like, G's got a little bit of scoreboard on us, and so therefore he's sort of taking some of these takes out for a spin. All of a sudden now he's got Nico ahead of Carson Beck. That's probably getting out there a little too much for me. He says that Nico may have more upside than Beck. Well, that may be true. But upside is sort of a difficult thing to quantify. And given the choice of high upside or high current value, I'll take the high current value. Thomas Bolton says, we're going to wrap up after this. Can you give us a defensive and offensive player who we should watch this spring that we may not be familiar with, but I think he's meaning that could be a big time for Georgia. All right, let me try to give you a good answer on this. So, most of y'all are familiar with most players, so I don't know that I can necessarily do that. Let me try to give a really good, interesting answer. All right, let me kind of roll through it this way. I think one of the most interesting storylines for Georgia in the offseason is going to be, does Jalen Walker take the next step towards being not just a good player, but a great player? One of the biggest issues for Georgia right now is, who are the great players going to be? A lot of good players, but who are the great players going to be? Georgia probably needed more great players here this season. And so Walker, and what he kind of describes as a hybrid role, can he play more outside and can he be a truly great player for you? I think that Mikael Williams probably sliding out to play a little bit more outside linebacker, similar type of thing. And for a guy like Damon Wilson, we didn't see at the end of the year, but y'all, that was a massive recruiting battle when Georgia won that. What Marvin Jones Jr. should have been this year, Damon Wilson in year 2 needs to be for Georgia next year. I think that is really crucially very, very important. I'd also say when you look at the defensive line, a guy we did not see in the Orange Bowl, like Christian Miller, that's a guy who him, but it's taking that next step up to be a huge part of the story for Georgia defensive line wise. The recipe for Georgia having a great defensive line next year is between the category of player you bring in, Xavier McLeod, players you're hoping to get back, Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson, young players who you hope step up. I'd put Christian Miller in that category. I'd put Jamal Jarrett in that category. I'd put Jordan Hall in that category. Did you see the photographs? And I know Jeff Santel's got some up at DawgNation.com of Joseph Jonah-Janye right now. Is that a freshman that is capable of perhaps jumping the line a little bit and being involved in a little bit more playing time? Like, that's your recipe for having a great defensive line. It's getting something out of guys that maybe pleasant surprise they return. Also a crop of young players, the Jarretts, the Millers, the Halls, the Jonah-Janyes, getting something there for that. On the offensive side of the ball, I continue to be really interested to see what the combination of Dylan Fairchild and Micah Morris can be as guards. And obviously Tate Ratledge comes back. That makes that even more interesting because now you're sort of fighting for playing time. But that battle is going to be pretty important because I believe that both Fairchild and Morris are very potentially important players for Georgia. But along the offensive line there as well, this may be the most important name of all. And that may be Monroe Freeling because Amarius Mims is leaving and Freeling gets his chance to step up. And in brief flashes this year, I think people were pretty happy with what they saw from Freeling. It was clearly a great prospect. And that could be the next great offensive lineman at Georgia. And Georgia could have 2 relatively young, but also very, very good offensive tackles next year with Ernest Green, who I think everybody likes, and Monroe Freeling, who I think is on his way to doing something pretty good there as well. That, it's going to begin for Georgia with a great offensive line. Clearly, the transition from Cedric Von Granger to Jared Wilson, probably at center, is a pretty big deal too. I know you asked for one name. I'm giving you more than that, but I believe that's how I'd sort of sum it up. So after all of that, I'll sum it up this way: what Georgia does to rebuild its defensive line, what Georgia does to kind of replace key names on its offensive line, Cedric Von Pran and Marius Mims. Those are probably among the most important stories in terms of how you see it start to play out during spring practice. That is my answer there on all of that. All right, we're going to go for now. Y'all check out RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that, including getting your heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Find them online, rsandrews.com, for a lot more on that. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by our friends at Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you.